My name is Juliet Anderson. I'm 28 years old. I was 7 the first time my father called me a liar in front of a room full of people. It was my aunt's birthday dinner. I knocked over a glass of juice and said it slipped. He looked at everyone and said, "She always says that. Never her fault." Everyone laughed. I didn't. That was the first time I understood something I wouldn't have words for until much later. That in some families, the story about you gets written early, and you spend years trying to edit something you were never allowed to author. And for 21 years, I tried to prove them wrong. I became careful, measured, predictable. I apologized before conversations even had the chance to go wrong. I learned how to shrink just enough to be acceptable, but never enough to be loved. Then I met Callum Reed. He was 31, a civil engineer, the kind of man who didn't rush his words or fake his reactions. We met at a rooftop fundraiser 3 years ago. He spilled his drink on my jacket within 4 minutes. And I remember bracing, waiting for dismissal, for awkwardness, for that subtle shift where people decide you're not worth the trouble. But instead, he stayed. He apologized like it actually mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a problem that needed to be managed. I felt seen. 14 months later, he proposed in our kitchen. No audience, no performance, just him, a ring from his grandmother, and a voice that shook slightly when he said my name. I said yes before he finished, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. We planned a small wedding in late September. The rehearsal dinner was set at Brennan's. Warm lights, close friends, something intimate and safe. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to earn love. I was standing inside it. My parents never liked Callum. My father thought he lacked presence. My mother smiled at him and quietly dismantled him the moment he left the room. But I had learned to filter them, or at least I thought I had, until 2 weeks before my wedding. Callum called me one afternoon. His voice wasn't angry. That would have been easier. It was careful. He told me my parents had come to his office, without telling me. They sat across from him and told him I had been pregnant at 22, that I gave birth, and that I abandoned the child. My father used the word bastard. My mother told him not to let me trap him too. And then Callum asked me something that should never feel dangerous in a relationship, but suddenly did. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" And in that moment, I felt 7 years old again. Not because I had lied, but because I knew what it felt like to not be believed. There had been a pregnancy, but everything else they said was a lie. When I was 22, I was with someone named Sebastian Cole. He wasn't cruel in obvious ways. He was worse, he was subtle. The kind of man who makes your decisions feel like mistakes before you've even made them. I got pregnant. I was scared. He made sure I stayed that way. And at 4 months, I miscarried. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a story. It was loss. The kind that doesn't just take something from you, it changes the way you exist afterward. There was no baby, no abandonment, just grief I never learned how to say out loud. Not even to Callum. My parents knew the truth. They were there. My mother held my hand in the hospital. And still, 2 weeks before my wedding, she rewrote it. I told Callum everything that night, not as a defense. As a truth, I was finally ready to stop hiding. He didn't interrupt. He didn't interrogate. When I finished, he held my hand and said, "I'm so sorry that happened to you." And something in me settled, because for the first time, someone wasn't trying to decide who I was. They were just listening. But my parents had already done what they came to do. They didn't need to convince him completely. They just needed to introduce doubt. That was enough. The rehearsal dinner came anyway. Brennan's looked exactly how I imagined it would. Soft light, warm voices, familiar faces, and for a few minutes, I almost believed everything would hold together. My parents were there, calm, polished, controlled, like none of it had happened, like they hadn't just tried to dismantle my life quietly, behind closed doors. At 8:17 p.m., the door opened, and something shifted. Her name was Nora Voss. I hadn't seen her in 6 years, but I recognized her immediately. She had been there during the hardest part of my life, the version of me I tried to leave behind. She walked straight to me with an envelope in her hands. No hesitation, no small talk, just urgency. We stepped outside. She told me to open it. Inside were my hospital records. Proof. Clear. Undeniable. And beneath that, messages between my mother and Sebastian. 3 months ago, she contacted him. She asked him to confirm a lie, that I had given birth, that I had abandoned a child. He refused. She pushed. He stopped responding. Even he wouldn't cross that line. Nora got the messages from him, and she drove hours to make sure I had them before I walked into a marriage built on something that was being quietly poisoned. Standing there, holding those papers, I didn't feel anger the way people expect. I felt clarity, the kind that doesn't explode. It settles. I walked back into the room. Callum saw my face and didn't ask questions. He just stood next to me. I placed the envelope in front of my parents. And for the first time in my life, I didn't try to soften the truth to make it easier for them to hear. I told everyone exactly what they had done. No raised voice, no performance, just facts. My father said nothing. My mother didn't look up. And I realized something in that moment that changed everything. They weren't powerful. They were just loud for a very long time. I asked them to leave. And this time, I didn't wait for permission. They left. The room went quiet, and then something unexpected happened. Callum's mother stood up and started clapping, slow, deliberate, like she understood exactly what had just been reclaimed. And then everyone joined. And for the first time, I wasn't the version of myself people questioned. I was the one who told the truth and was believed. We got married that Saturday. It wasn't perfect. It was better. It was honest. My parents weren't there. And nothing about that felt like loss. It felt like space. Space I didn't have to defend anymore. Callum cried during his vows. I let him finish before I cried through mine. Nora sat in the front row, right where she was always meant to be. I am Juliet Anderson, soon to be Juliet Reed. And I spent most of my life trying to prove I wasn't who they said I was. I don't do that anymore, because the truth doesn't need performance. It just needs distance from the people who keep rewriting it. And here's the part no one tells you. Walking away doesn't feel powerful at first. It feels unfamiliar, quiet, almost uncomfortable, because you're not used to a life where you don't have to defend your own reality. But if you stay there long enough, that quiet becomes something else. It becomes peace. And peace is not something you beg for. It's something you build by deciding who no longer gets access to you. So if you've ever sat in a room where your truth was turned into something unrecognizable, understand this. That wasn't your ending. That was your evidence. And one day, whether it's at a dinner table, a conversation, or a moment you didn't plan, you will get the chance to tell your story without interruption. And when you do, make sure it's the first time you don't apologize for it. If you made it this far, then you didn't just listen to a story, you felt it. Because somewhere in all of this, there's a piece of truth that hits closer than most people are willing to admit. Maybe it's the feeling of not being believed. Maybe it's knowing what it's like to have your story twisted by the very people who were supposed to protect it. Or maybe it's that quiet realization that you've been shrinking yourself just to keep the peace. Here's what matters. At some point, you have to decide that your truth is not up for negotiation anymore. Not for comfort, not for approval, not even for family. Because the moment you stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, is the moment your life actually starts to feel like your own. If this story stayed with you, even a little, then don't ignore that. There's a reason it did. Make sure you're here for the next one. Because some stories don't just entertain, they remind you who you really are.